Boundaries are essential for healthy relationships, self-respect and well-being, but they can also be challenging to define and to communicate. In today's episode, we're exploring what boundaries are, why they matter, and how to set and communicate them effectively. By the end, you'll feel empowered to create boundaries that protect your energy, build trust, and foster stronger connections. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Able to Care podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about boundaries. Now, boundaries is a bit of a hot topic. We're doing a lot of training courses with Able Training around this subject at the moment. It seems to be an area that people are really starting to recognize, both from a personal and a professional point of view. And within working relationships, therapeutic relationships, it's really important that we understand that in any therapeutic relationship, they are respectful, caring, but they're also boundaried. Boundaries are really important in any friendship, relationship, any caregiver and receiver kind of role or situation. So whether you're a teacher, whether you're a caregiver or parent or in a relationship generally, or a manager, boundaries are massively important for staff to have, for people to have generally. So let's talk a little bit about boundaries. Now, boundaries aren't barriers. They're not there to kind of put up guards and fences against any human connection or interaction, but they are about maintaining our kind of safety and our trust. So boundaries are the limits that we set to protect our emotional, physical, and mental well-being. Think of them as like invisible lines that define what's okay and what isn't in our relationships and our interactions. They're not about shutting people out. They're not barriers, as we said. They're about creating clarity and respect for everyone involved. So boundaries can be physical, in the fact that maybe I'm not comfortable with hugs from strangers, for instance, and therefore that's a personal boundary for me. But maybe many of you listening have allowed somebody to hug you, even though you didn't really feel comfortable to allow it. Emotional. I can't have this conversation right now. It's too upsetting. Being aware of your own emotions and knowing what you can and can't cope with. Knowing when your emotional resilience or your emotional battery is low, and therefore maybe you can't be there for certain people in that moment until you get a recharge, until you've done some self-care. Sometimes around time as well, whether it be you taking my time or being able to focus on something specifically and not getting distracted, or how long I spend with you, for instance, could be a boundary that we need to put in place. Now, why do these matter? Boundaries are more than just rules. They're acts of self-care as well. They're about managing relationships. It's not just self-care, also personal safety. Having that assertiveness in a boundary lets people know that where the line is, what the kind of the appropriate and inappropriate is. And understanding and managing your boundaries in a respectful, kind and calm way is really beneficial for people to develop respect for you as much as anything else. Being a doormat and just going along with what other people want is not good for your mental health, but it's also not good for managing relationships, fostering trust. Would you trust somebody who could always be manipulated? And this is why when working with certain individuals, it's really important to have your healthy boundaries, because you demonstrate yourself as more trustworthy, because you have clear, I do what I say and I say what I do, and I'm a bit more consistent, and you know where the line is. I always found at school that sometimes a teacher who didn't have clear boundaries, that kind of was sometimes cool and casual and then suddenly lost it when they lost their temper, was much harder to cope with. And I found much more difficult to connect and trust than sometimes a strict teacher, because at least I always knew where I stood. They're about protecting your well-being. Boundaries help prevent burnout and resentment. If I keep allowing my boundaries to be pushed, I'm going to burn out as a result. And then I'm going to resent for somebody else. But as part of it, it's my responsibility that did I set my boundaries appropriately? They create space for you to recharge and prioritize what really matters the most in your life. It also builds healthy relationships. When you set boundaries, you communicate your needs clearly, which fosters trust and mutual respect. So many people kind of get annoyed with others because they push their boundaries or they cross boundaries or what they say, but did you ever make it clear? Did you ever kind of say that's a boundary? It's like somebody encroaching in your garden when there wasn't a fence or a hedge there in the slightest to go, well, they shouldn't have done that. But did you make it clear that it was your garden? It's exactly the same premise with boundaries. And this is the importance of being able to communicate them appropriately and effectively. It also, having clear boundaries as well when you're working with others is a role modeling. It's modeling healthy behavior. It's good to have boundaries. It's good to say no to things you don't want to do. You should be, I always say that, all parents should encourage their kids to say no to them occasionally, because it's demonstrating a boundary of something like, hey, this is something you don't want to do, which frees you up time to say yes to things you do want to do. We don't want a kid to just, follow blindly and do whatever we say and just be obedient and do as they're told, because doesn't that leave them really vulnerable for other people to do the same to them? So it's so important that we role model the importance of boundaries, that it's okay to say no to things you don't want to do or you don't like. So by setting boundaries, you show others it's okay to advocate for their own needs too. It's a ripple effect that promotes resilient and promotes healthy dynamics for everyone. First off, as far as how we set these boundaries, we need to know what our boundaries are. So before you can communicate your boundaries, you need to actually understand them. So take some time to reflect. Here's a few key questions that you can utilize that might be helpful. What drains your energy? What do you find steals your, depletes your social battery or your spoonfuls of energy each day? You need to be aware of that and self-aware of that as far as what you can and can't cope with. That allows you to then set your boundaries of going, say I am going to a social event, for instance, maybe a case of like, I know I can cope with an hour, but after that, I start to feel really drained as a result, which then means that I'm less effective and I feel a bit more burned out the next day. Well, there's your boundary. Hey, I'd love to come along, but I can only come for an hour. You now set a boundary, okay? Rather than kind of pushing through, trying to people please and fear of missing out or whatever it is that holds you there, and then you end up struggling the next day as a result. Also, bear in mind, I know some of you have seen some other episodes we've talked about radiators and drains, or taps and drains, where some people are radiators. They fill your life with positivity and energy, and others drain your energy. So again, who are those people? That allows you to, again, to create healthy boundaries. The other thing is another question: what makes you feel uncomfortable or disrespected? What doesn't feel nice? Whether that's be physical touch or behavior or emotional kind of using you emotionally, whatever it is. Knowing what makes you feel uncomfortable and being mindful of that. Okay? This isn't a case that then you have to, well, it's my way or the highway. You can't have an arrogance when it comes to this, but you can recognize what makes you feel uncomfortable and then work with others to kind of manage that. So how could they engage with you for you to feel comfortable, but also then how can you kind of manage the relationship appropriately? Also, what helps? What makes you feel supported? What makes you feel valued? What helps you to feel calmer, re-energizes you? Example on your phone, for instance, could be, if constant notifications distracting you, boundary might be, I turn my phone off during certain hours. Now, other people might find that irritating because they can't get hold of you. Then that's irritating. It's something you need, so you set your boundary. Unless there's a health or safety issue, it's cost benefit sometimes, isn't it? Going, hey, here's an emergency number that you can contact me on. Okay, you just set up a second phone, which is always worrying. Start small. Setting boundaries can feel daunting, so start with low-stakes situations first. If you are a people pleaser, practice saying no to something minor, like deciding a second helping at dinner to build your confidence. Not eating everything on your plate can sometimes be quite liberating, especially if you came from a household like you should always eat everything on your plate. It might just be saying no to, usually going out on a Friday night, but you don't feel like it. Just say, hey, I'm not going to come out this week, but I'll give you a call during the week and we'll sort something out for another time. Just find something to say no to if you'd usually say yes to it. Feels counterintuitive because most people are encouraged to say yes to everything, but it's about managing your energy, managing your boundaries, doing the things you want to do. Vague boundaries leave room for misinterpretation, so be clear and direct about what you need. Instead of saying like, I need more space, we might just say, I need 30 minutes of quiet time after work before I feel ready to talk. If I'm not explicit, if I just say I need more space, well, it's like later. Or if you're telling somebody, when will it be? Later. It's so ambiguous. Does that mean a year? Does that mean a week? Does it mean a minute? Later is too ambiguous, so be specific. What do you actually need to get that energy back or to have that kind of situation? So I need 30 minutes of quiet time after work before I'm ready to talk. Or I just need a couple of minutes just to reset myself and go for a walk outside, and then I'll be ready to talk. Okay, that's a boundary. Another boundary could be within an argument, maybe a case of you set it up in advance, going, if we start losing our temper and we start using rude language towards each other, then we need to stop having the conversation. And that will be my boundary. So if you start then swearing or there's any kind of bad language or any insults being thrown, we need to stop and we'll walk away from there. That's not something that I'm dealing with. And then you set that in advance. And then if an argument ever gets to that point where anything's nasty being said or anything like that, just going, I see we've lost control of this conversation. We're starting to use inappropriate language and therefore we need to stop. I'm going to walk away and we'll come back to this later. And that's your boundary. Now, how to communicate those boundaries? Use I statements. It's not putting on anybody else. Framing your boundary as an I statement helps avoid sounding accusatory and keeps the focus on your needs rather than what other people should be doing. So if let's go back to the argument example, if I am having a disagreement and another person wants to swear, well, it's not I don't have a right to tell them not to swear. I do have a right not to listen to that swearing and to walk away from it. That's the difference. In case if I'm not engaging in that, if that's how you're going to speak, then I walk away. But I can't say stop swearing at me because, well, that's on them, not on you. So it's about what you're willing to accept, not what you have to get to dictate from other people's behavior, if that makes sense. What you have towards you. I feel overwhelmed when I get unexpected calls. So I'd appreciate if we could schedule our chats instead. Okay. I feel overwhelmed if I don't know what time you're going to get back. I'd really appreciate it if you just sent me a message to let me know. Okay. Now they don't have to, but it's just setting that clear boundary. Then is up to you how you accept that or how you manage it. So how to communicate boundaries. So first off, use I statements. Framing your boundaries as an I statement helps avoid you sounding accusatory and keeps the focus on your needs. I feel uncomfortable when. I feel that when we get to this point in the conversation, then we should stop. So an example with the swearing, it's not about like what they can do. It could be a case of, I don't feel that we should talk to each other in nasty words or use swearing. And so therefore, if we reach that point in an argument, then I'm going to walk away and we will stop the conversation there. That allows you, it's not telling them that they can't swear, it's saying that I'm not willing to accept that and I feel uncomfortable with it, rather than you shouldn't swear and you can't do that. Because you don't get to dictate what somebody else kind of does and their boundaries. You do get to dictate what happens to you and your boundaries. Stay calm and confident. Communicating boundaries can feel uncomfortable, especially if you're a people pleaser and it feels like you're blocking them out, or maybe they might be a little bit irritated, but confidence makes a big difference. Speak calmly, assertively, and avoid apologizing for setting a boundary. If a case of, I need to go home, I'm just going to come in for an hour, don't apologize for it. I can't deal with that right now. I've got an awful lot of other things going on, but thanks for understanding. So don't apologize. Okay. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by stuff, then communicate that. If you can't give your attention to everybody, if you can't cope with going round to that friend's house, then just be clear with it. Do be prepared for pushback. People are always going to push boundaries. Think about all children push boundaries. That doesn't mean they don't like them. It just means that they need to check them. They need to make sure, how secure is this? Can I get away with pushing more? Just think of it like you're only allowed one chocolate, why wouldn't you try and ask for a second chocolate? Just because you said, well, my boundary is one chocolate, but I like chocolates and therefore I want a second one. It's perfectly normal for people to try and push boundaries. It doesn't make them bad people. It just makes them human. But being clear with those boundaries and kind of going, no, we said one. Now, obviously, we're not really talking about chocolates here. We're talking about any kind of relationship exchange. If you set a boundary, you sometimes have to be consistent with that boundary. It doesn't mean they're bad if they're pushing against it. They're just testing the water. A boundary is only as strong as your ability to maintain it, essentially. So if somebody repeatedly crosses your boundaries, calmly reinstating them, and then if necessary, enforcing the consequences. So you might say, if we go back to the argument with swearing or somebody using inappropriate language, you might say, look, if we're going to be swearing at each other, we're not going to continue this conversation. Please, can you talk to me calmly? If they don't do it like 3 times, you might just go, okay, I think we need to call it a day because we don't seem to be able to talk to each other nicely. And we walk away from that. That's it. So things like the 5-step appeal can be quite a good way of maintaining boundaries. If you've not heard of 5-step appeal before, you can obviously Google it, or I will do another episode on it one time. It's a very useful tool that is quite often used in conflict management situations. As caregivers, it's so important to set your boundaries, even though you're there to care for the other person. It can feel, the desire to help them can feel endless, but without boundaries, burnout is almost inevitable. You need to know where your energy is going and what you feel comfortable and uncomfortable with so that you can be the best caregiver that you can. Without those boundaries, as I've spoken about numerous times, you have to be selfish to be selfless. Okay, so you have to set those boundaries. One of my staff team actually have, we've set up for her, she puts her headphones in and I'll use a polite term, it's an F-off flag. So she puts this flag up, which basically means I need some focus on the work I'm doing. Please don't disturb me. Please don't talk to me. She sets a timer on how long that flag is up for. And when she puts that flag back down, people can come back to asking her questions. But it's just a way of setting that boundary going, I need this focus time for me. I know it's counterintuitive that children don't seem to like boundaries, but they need boundaries so badly, and it helps them to feel safer. The wonderful analogy of the theme park ride where the harness is pulled down over your shoulders, but everybody pushes it to see whether it's safe. That doesn't mean you don't like the harness. It just means to make sure it's going to hold you okay. And this is where boundaries come into play. It gives children an element of consistency and trust, going, hey, you're somebody worth relying on because you do have boundaries and you stick to them. You are trustworthy. You're reliable. You're predictable. It's the same with friendships, exactly the same. The challenges that many people have around boundaries. One is feeling guilty about saying no. You're a people pleaser. And it's natural to feel guilty about failing boundaries, especially if you are a people pleaser. But remember, saying no to others often means saying yes to yourself and your priorities. Instead of thinking I'm letting them down, try thinking I'm respecting my limits so I can show up better in the long run. Fear of conflict is another reason people don't always set boundaries. But they don't have to create conflict if they're communicated with kindness and clarity. And if conflict does arise, it's often a sign the relationship needs healthier dynamics anyway. So focus on staying calm, respectful, and stating things like, I value our relationship, and setting this boundary helps us both. Dealing with repeated boundary crosses. When somebody consistently ignores your boundaries, it might be time to reassess that relationship, or you need to be firmer in those boundaries. I've already explained my boundary is important to me. If it continues to be crossed, I'll need to step back. Remember that setting boundaries is an act of care, both for yourself and for the people that you're working with, supporting with, and have relationships with. They're not selfish. They're necessary for healthy interactions and sustainable well-being. So setting and communicating boundaries takes practice, but the rewards are well worth it. You'll feel more control of your life, experience deeper connections, and protect your energy for the things that truly matter. Remember, boundaries are a gift to yourself and to others. They create clarity, respect, and trust. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever find the pressures of supporting, teaching, or caring for someone else overwhelming and wish you had access to more support and information? The Able to Care podcast, in connection with Able Training, has created the ablehub.uk, where for less than the price of a coffee a week, you can access exclusive podcast content, resources, events, and over 45 certified online courses, covering topics like self-care, understanding dementia, neurodiversity, first aid, conflict management, financial advice, and so much more, with new content and courses being added each month. We are so confident that you will benefit from the Able Hub that we are offering 14 days access completely free of charge. No contract, cancel anytime. Become part of the ablehub.uk community and gain the support, knowledge, and resources you deserve. Don't struggle alone. Be able. Find the link in the description.